I'm Mikeya Griffin, and I'm the newish Executive Director of Rondo Community Land Trust.
I'm Aaron Maripol. I'm out of Colorado with the Urban Land Conservancy, and I've been there for 15 years.
Awesome. All right, I'm in charge of this. Okay, so introductions about Rondo, about ULC, and then we'll get into some commercial CLT basics. We'll talk specifically about two projects that each of our organizations have done. We'll talk about some stories of impact, and we may. Oh, that's what we wanted to do.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
No,
you ask.
no.
You go.
Okay. So down here, we had this piece about breakout session, each table to do some work, and we wanted to get a sense from you all whether you wanted to do that, or would you prefer that we kind of, as we go through discussing the different commercial CLT examples, really kind of take question and answers there, and then maybe not do the table. So the second, I see that meaning two, meaning second option, don't do the table work, right? Is everyone okay with that? All right, okay. Thumbs up. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Table work it is then. Okay.
All right.
All right, let's dig into it.
Thank you, Justin.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah.
So a little bit about Rondo. Rondo Community Land Trust, as we all know what a community land trusts are, so I'm not going to get into all of that, but we were founded in 1993. We were the first residential community land trust in the state, and we were focused in the Rondo community. We were named after Rondo, which was a main commercial African-American corridor and historic Black community. And, you know, Rondo CLT, we really look at our work as building community wealth through the creation of affordable homeownership opportunities, commercial space, affordable rental, and stewardshiping of community assets. And just a little bit about the Rondo community. We really look at our work now moving forward as a reparative framework, really looking at how Rondo was a historically Black community. It had its own social and economic and infrastructure, resulting in both financial and cultural wealth. The insular nature of the community, even though it was forced through segregation, really created conditions for deeply interdependent, reciprocal, I can't talk today, and cooperative economies to flourish. But through mass displacement, when 94 came through, Highway 94 came through the community and really decimated it. Over 700 homes were lost, 300 businesses were lost. There were some studies done that anticipate over $157 million of intergenerational wealth was dismantled from the community. So a lot of our work, even though we are born and raised in Rondo, I was born and raised in Rondo at least, and our work has gone to all of St. Paul and Ramsey County. It's really taking that shared interdependent, shared ownership, which is our model, and really highlighting that in the work that we do.
Great. So Urban Land Conservancy, 501c3 nonprofit real estate company. We kind of uniquely, we were seed capital from an oil and gas company that no longer exists, Gary Williams Energy, but they were the ones that provided us with some real estate and provided us with some cash to go forward. What I will give them a lot of credit is that when they birthed it, they realized it didn't or shouldn't be a part of who they are, meaning like it was going to be an add-on or a separate entity, tied to them. We actually were formed as a supporting organization to the Denver Community Foundation. So the reason that was the case as a community foundation and being a supporting org actually allows you to get funding through, say, a single entity. Again, if they were going to take the proceeds from selling their refinery, those kinds of things, they could have put it to us. They didn't, but that was why we were set up as the supporting org entity. We no longer are. We're truly on our own as a 501c3. The last piece I call out is about in-placement. So we obviously were dealing with displacement. So what are strategies that we can really incorporate that are about in-placement? How do we ensure that the communities where we're investing or buying in are going to be communities for the folks that are in that community as opposed to new folks coming in?
Awesome. I also forgot to mention why we're here is that we were also the first commercial land trust in the state of Minnesota by completing our flagship project on Selby Avenue.
And then these are just a few examples. Acquire land, sometimes we acquire buildings. We bought a university last year, so that was a big deal. With a lot of historic buildings on the campus, formerly known as Johnson Wales University. This last piece, this was an old bowling alley that we bought, demoed, and built a 2-generational school. It's called New Legacy, so it's a high school for teen parents and a preschool for their kids.
That's awesome.
And so that's in a land trust, this is in a land trust, that's in a land trust. And again, all of it is got some kind of commercial, what we would say nonprofit use, as opposed to more kind of the traditional residential. So yeah, that's it, great.
Okay, the commercial basics.
Yeah.
So types of projects. There's a language. Why don't you start out with?
No, you're doing great.
Okay.
I'll take the last. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Types of projects. You have land acquisition and development partners. You can acquire existing property and acquire that and rehab it. There's something we call our business initiated program, which we really take business owners that are looking at owning their own brick and mortar and then bringing it into the community land trust model by helping affordability through purchase of the land. And then you have new construction, mixed use, or just commercial.
Before you click on,
so
yeah,
sorry.
no, that's good. Just curious questions for folks in the room. How many of you have actually done some type of commercial land trust today? Okay, that's why you're here, right? Because you haven't and you want to learn. Okay. Just maybe a couple things to jot down. What are some things you're looking to get out of this? Like, what do you want to know as you're sitting in this room for the next hour plus?
You didn't have to remind them of the hour plus. I mean, we'll try to be as entertaining as we can. Okay.
Yeah, doing a lot of residential development, and from a mixed use perspective, it just feels like in certain communities where we're working, we really want to have a mixed use solution.
Right.
And the more that commercial component can be leveraged with a land trust model that can serve, I love the focus on in-placement or anti-displacement, so that those projects are just kind of heaping benefit on top of benefit. That's kind of what I'm hoping to understand.
Great. Anyone else?
I'd like to learn how you can add residential to existing commercial and commercial zones.
Any other? Yes, in the back.
I'm sorry, to commercial?
One of the things we have on there is business initiated, so it's the nonprofit I work for has a lot of commercial, but how can we take that commercial that we've been leasing for many years and convert it, but having businesses that can actually be successful?
What you showed up there are some complex commercial development. What types of professional expertise do you need on staff, and what expertise do you get from somewhere else?
Great question.
Only I can read this.
No, it's Anyone else? Yes.
What role are you playing, if any, with the businesses that are in there, especially if they're your newer ones or, kind of that vulnerable state?
Okay.
What kind of stake do you have?
So just to kind of, like you've got, say, Main Street, and you've got a bunch of commercial buildings on that Main Street, and what kind of role does the CLT play in working with them when they're maybe that building's up for sale or
Or if you have the building, but
Yes.
the business inside of
Yes.
it.
Okay,
Like
Yep.
How
got it.
What's our post and pre-purchase and post-purchase stewardship of that business owner? Okay.
Oh, and I'll take that. So this next slide is possible structures of a commercial community land trust. So ownership, lease, cooperative, other kind of commercial enterprise. I'll kick it off on the ownership piece, and please chime in on this as well. So there are plenty of times where we have in our work where we have a nonprofit as well as for-profits, but the majority of folks we work with are nonprofits. I mentioned that school, that new legacy school. Let me use them as an example. They needed to find real estate. They didn't have the real estate expertise. So the real estate expertise we brought, we have a person, the head of real estate development for our team, who really was the person that they were interfacing with. Let's understand what it is they need. So they talked about they needed, I'll just say, 20,000 square feet of space. They needed to be able to have separation between a high school and a preschool. And with preschool, I'm sure you guys know, lots of different codes with preschool and what you have to do, bathroom-wise, you name it. It's a very different, and there are a lot of rules and regs with early childhood preschool programs. So you got to have someone on, in this case, on our team who was that interface, kind of get the wish list, understand, and then went out. And we spent probably 3 to 6 months looking at different sites to find what was the right place. Generally, we were looking not to build new construction. We were looking to do a retrofit where we could convert and rehab. The problem there was that all of the rehab, the buildings, like I mentioned, the bowling alley, the cost to do that retrofit was so expensive that it came down to, we got to knock it down and do new construction. Not only that, we have to knock it down and do new construction, and we got to open up in 8 months. So that was a big, oh boy, because generally we're there to hold the site, but in this case, the school doesn't have the resources to go out and finance the construction. So we took that on. And so again, then we had a project, you asked about kind of staffing. So there was the head of real estate that was working with them on the front end. Then we had a project manager who worked with the school, the contractor who's doing the construction, the architect, et cetera. And they're meeting, that's their job. For the next 8 months, full-time, get up, we got to get this it was a 22,000 square foot building built. And so lots and lots of, I would say, kind of just the ongoing kind of work that has to happen. And for us, it was a lot of risk. We're taking on a $6+ million construction loan. The school had no track record. They had a great reputation for what they wanted to do, but they had no track record. So there's a huge risk factor that we had to build in. So if we built this school and the school's unsuccessful, what are we going to be able to do? Is this space that could be used for other things? And I think we felt, okay, we can get comfortable with that. So all of that is, we did a lease with them for 5 years, and then after 5 years, they've been a very successful school. 85% of the high school students that are graduating are going on to some kind of college, other degree, which is great. But we sold them the improvements. So we sold to the school the improvements after 5 years, so it was a lease purchase option. And then they took on the ownership of the building. We still have the ground lease, we own the land, and we also have a parking lot. And that parking lot, some point, will get developed into probably affordable housing. So that's kind of a quick on the ownership, and I'll turn it to you.
Sure. And that, to your point, when you're looking at converting your existing commercial to leasehold, to ownership, it could be that you could condoize it. There's so many different ways you could work through that. But so leasing, where the CLT owns both the building and the land on behalf of the community. So leases, and you lease to businesses or a nonprofit at an affordable rate. It can be structured for a lease to own. So in our instance, our flagship development, our Selby Milton Victoria, which was a mixed-use development, because the community was really looking at not being displaced off of Selby Avenue. Rents were rising. We were able to put together a capital stack that keeps rates affordable at, I think right now on Selby Avenue, rents are going anywhere from $16 to $25 a square feet, and we're at $7 a square foot. So we were able to do that through stacking the capital for that. And we own both the building and the land, and we own all the commercial outright. And we have 34 units of affordable senior housing, and we did that in a general partnership with another developer. So we are general partners in that, but we have the ground lease that's attached to that. We also have some other documents that are attached to that that help us make sure that everybody stays on their track and what they're supposed to be doing with that. At some point, we'll look at ownership, but we do have equity shares. So after all of the bills and things are paid, if there are any dollars left over, then those who are paying rent share in the dividends of those. That's how we handle that. We could also do.
Before you go to the
well,
co-op,
yep, mhm.
you're going to go to
Yep.
cooperative?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to, because one of the convert from lease to ownership and just be really clear here. So I think one of the things you want to know with your stakeholders and who you're working with is like, hey, not only do I trust them, do I think financially that this is going to be a successful model, right? You don't want to go spend $6 million on a construction loan, build a school, and have a school not be successful, right? So part of what got us comfortable was that there were a number of foundations that were backing Piton. I'm just looking at my friend Yoel, who used to be at the Piton Foundation, but we had local foundations that were putting money to support their work, not us in the building, but really kind of the programming side. So that gave us a level of confidence knowing like we've got a real legit partner here. The other thing I noticed Reed in the back there, kind of our first example, I met Reed 15 years ago. He was running a nonprofit called City Wild in another neighborhood in Denver. And we bought this building, which was basically a city block that had lots of issues, lots of deferred maintenance. If I'm not mistaken, Reed, the first thing you mentioned was that you had, pretty frequently when it was raining, water would come into the office. So in that case, City Wild was an anchor tenant. They were a nonprofit. They had been there prior to our buying the building, but we worked with City Wild and then other tenants as well. But at that time, you guys were really the only ones there. There was a school on the other end. But again, that's a situation where we own the building and the land. Since then, part of the site we took down, we demoed. And so we are now doing 60-ish condos that'll be built on the land that we own. And so it'll be in a land trust, that component. So just kind of an example of the lease to side.
Yes, and also again back to the what kind of types of expertise do you need on the staff? At the time, this happened pre-Mikeya. I just like to say that we actually had we have a lot of really awesome developer partners that we relied on, and we also relied on another nonprofit to kind of help make sure businesses were able to move in to really kind of help us vet them at the time, but we are moving some of that in-house now, so that's great. All right, and then a cooperative. You could do it through a cooperative. A cooperative could be established to purchase the building, and the CLT could retains the ownership of the land on behalf of the community. So we are working with a cooperative right now, a business cooperative that would like to invest in its own building and work with the community land trust to land trust the land. So that's another way that you can work. And there are other types like other commercial enterprises that you could do. All right.
So here is basically all the different kinds of funding sources that we see in kind of commercial community land trusts. And maybe I hit the slide too quickly. Were there questions about the previous slide? Or are we okay to advance? Good here? Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So, let's say you had a couple of businesses that wanted to come together in a cooperative. What are the risks of doing that versus just leasing the spaces to these individual businesses, or vice versa? Is there something that's better to do in certain situations?
Well, dealing with a cooperative, as you know, it's another entire governance structure on top of your CLT. So you have that, and it could be a cooperative investment that wants to do it, or it could be the actual cooperative business that wants to do it. And honestly, each one of these are so uniquely different that you just have to have some expertise and to help work through what does it really look like. And it's really going to depend on from a really financial and risk factors. So do they have a good business model? Can it be supported? Can they do the governance from a cooperative standpoint? And are there other organizations around that can be provided for technical assistance and other expertise? So really, and ultimately, as we're community organizations, is this also what the community is looking forward to at the same time. So you have all of those things that you have to put into your soup mix and figure out if you're going to have a really tasty chicken noodle soup, or if we got to start doing the recipe again.
So, and I would say in Colorado, cooperatives have been not as effective. At least that's been my experience when we have had conversations with different cooperatives, more around food co-ops. Got to have some kind of like balance sheet of something, some ability to show that we can underwrite them if we're going to end up having a cooperative take on the ground floor retail space, right? So yeah, it's for us. It's not been. We have yet to make something work with a cooperative. You guys have. So.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
In experience, I believe cooperatives can be successful. It's really going to be down to the business model and the governance, and making sure that the correct training is there and that the correct, their ability to finance themselves and a business model that can be successful and sustainable as a cooperative.
All right, so this is my favorite slide is about all the different funding pieces that you can work with to try to make something work. Is everyone familiar with new market tax credits? No? Low-income housing tax credits? Everyone familiar with that, what we call LIHTC? Okay. Would it help just to do a quick, hey, this is what LIHTC is, this is what new markets is? Yeah, okay. So in urban settings, low-income housing tax credits, actually in rural settings, everywhere in the country, low-income housing tax credits is the #1 financing tool to do affordable rental housing. I will also share there are opportunities for LIHTC deals to ultimately, when their kind of 17-year rule, this is getting into some of the IRS regs, but to think about LIHTC deals as potentially deals that could ultimately be converted into homeownership.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, it's not something in year 17, it's down the road. But it's an important, really critical tool for commercial CLT work because, in our experience, has been a lot of times tax credit developers don't have a clue as what to do on that ground floor retail.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing some heads nod. I mean, certainly in urban settings, but I think even in smaller communities, a LIHTC deal, your planning department is probably going to want to see some kind of ground floor activation as opposed to just having it be residential. And so to me, that's something to really think about when you're partnering with a tax credit developer is like, okay, we have the land as the land trust. You're going to build 60 units of affordable housing through LIHTC financing. That ground floor, that 8,000 square feet that you have no idea. And just so you know, most tax credit developers, when they're getting their underwriting, they're not underwriting the commercial.
No.
There's no revenue real stream. So that basically it's zero for them. So you have an opportunity to basically say to the developer, okay, great, but here's what we want on the commercial side. We want this kind of tenant finish. We have these expectations. And by the way, we own the land, right? So we're making, this is part of our deal in our ground lease with you, developer, that you're going to provide these things on that ground floor activation. So just want to put that down. That's a really key tool. New markets works on commercial side. It's a little more challenging. It doesn't bring the same amount of equity that a low-income housing tax credit deal. So just to give you an idea, if I have a $10 million low-income housing tax credit development, and I go out to the market and folks are paying, call it 90 cents on the dollar, that translates to $9 million in equity out of my total $10 million cost. So I'm only having to borrow about $1 million, right? That's the delta between the 9 and the 10 million. That's all I'm having to borrow is 1 million. So that's huge on the residential side. New markets, kind of same model. Maybe you're getting about 3-ish million out of that 10 million is going to stay in the deal permanently, 2.5 to 3 million. So it doesn't bring the same amount of equity, which means you've got to figure out other resources, other gap finding to make something work. Again, for new markets, historically, most often it's used for commercial uses. That school I was telling you about, when they bought the improvements, they went to the new market world and got new market credits to basically buy the improvements. That's how they financed it. And so that's a really good tool, even thinking about that ground floor retail, to think about how new markets can play out. What I will tell you, new markets is very costly, it's very expensive, a lot of legal fees, so a lot of things with it if you're going to do a new market deal. So I would not start with a new market deal. I would start with a LIHTC deal if you had a site that was going to do both, get some residential, but definitely get that ground floor activated, that commercial ground floor.
And we did LIHTC with our affordable senior development. And actually, that's one of the ways we were able to also look at when the building was being built, like how can we incorporate some of the things that were part of the residential portion to make sure that it kept our costs down as we built out our commercial space at the same time.
So, and for tax credit deals, we don't have the in-house capacity. This is one where you go, for us, we contract it out. We have a kind of a third-party party who knows how, a third-party consultant who knows all the things that come with the tax credit application, has worked with all the different investors. So, and I've done a bunch of tax credit deals, but I still know I can't do this. Like, I need someone who's like in this on the day-to-day basis. So there, we hired a consultant. Just to give you an idea, that consultant for 2.5 years of work is going to charge probably around 80 grand, just to put it in perspective, 85 grand. They're taking care of your whole application, vetting of the investors, all of that. So that's something that we don't have in-house. The other piece, the biggest cost, are the attorneys on both LIHTC and new market deals. So again, don't have the in-house for that. That's where you're paying, and that's the big gulp.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
It is.
So on a typical LIHTC deal that we've seen on the residential, you're talking upwards of $150,000 to $200,000 just in legal fees. Not just one attorney. I mean, you got bond counsel, so you've got your own. So there's a lot of different attorneys in it. New markets is even more expensive. So that's where you really. I'll just have to say, it's like, man, do I really want to do this new market deal where like 25% of my cost is going to attorneys? So that's just something to think about as you're going. Think about these things.
Think about it. Yes.
Think. Did you want to
Sure,
chat
we
any
can
more?
talk a little bit about. Nope. You covered that.
Well, I really focus on the tax credits. Does everyone know? I mean, I assume everyone knows block grant dollars, right? Home funds. We don't need to get into that, right? Yes? No?
Okay. And just here where we have community investment trusts and investment cooperatives, these are kind of newer on the scene things, but it's really as community organizations, how can we really help community invest in their own community and their development? So through community investment trust and investment cooperatives, there's a possibility of structuring so your community can buy into that. Again, this also requires, additional staff time. It requires, you got to have a good financial department, because depending on what you're going to do here, and we're exploring and actually doing a pilot program on a community investment trust deal. So it's going to be really fun. And
can I jump on the community investment? So we worked years ago. I think the Twin Cities was a part of it. Calvert had this Calvert Notes. Does this ring a bell to folks? Anyone? No? No, Shelly?
It's okay. Well, not necessarily new on the scene,
so Calvert is over under the CDFIs over there and local banks, and I have a whole nother. Does anyone in the room work with the CDFI? Okay. Work with, but you're not a CDFI. You are a CDFI. Cool. Okay. Don't take offense when I go there about CDFIs. But anyway, so Calvert is a national CDFI. They're based out of Bethesda, Maryland. We worked with them on an acquisition facility to go buy commercial properties. That's what it was for. It was a $10 million loan program to go and buy these things. They had these Calvert Notes, which were really cool. Like for $20, as little as $20, you in the neighborhood can invest in this property. So great. Calvert was kind of managing it for the big event, which was the Clinton Foundation had a big kickoff in Denver, and it was all this great noise. And then after, they went away. So the notes, great. It's really a cool program. The problem is, unless you've got someone locally that's going to continue to manage it,
right,
I would tell you not to get involved. Just because what ultimately happened is that I felt like Calvert used us as kind of a marketing gig. And don't get me wrong, we got access to low interest capital, which was really important to go out and buy some properties. So I'm happy about that. But the flip was, we really didn't have that ongoing relationship with folks in the community who were buying these Calvert Notes.
So,
Okay.
no, that's great. And as part of that, just making sure that we continue to do what we all do best, which is really connecting with our communities, our homeowners, and if you decide to go there. But talk to us next year and we'll tell you how that went. The one thing we didn't put up here was, well, federal programs. Is USDA a federal program?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. So rural areas, the USDA also might have some programs that you can leverage for this. But, any questions about this? And
I'm going to do my CDF
Yeah.
thing.
yes.
All right. So CDFI, local banks. The experience we've had is that CDFIs tend to be much more risk averse than our local banks. And that may not be the case in your community. And no offense, Ben, you guys, I'm sure, are not risk averse knowing its habitat. But we have a number of national CDFIs. The local CDFIs tend to be much more focused on small business lending. So they're going to be doing 50,000, 100,000. They're typically not getting involved on the commercial real estate like acquisition side. They may help, a company or a small business startup with a loan to do tenant improvements, those kinds of things. But the national CDFIs are the ones that do the real estate lending. And what I've seen, at least in my experience in Denver area, is that they are lending at anywhere from 150 to 250 basis points higher than our local bank. And that's crazy. Now, what CDFIs will do is they'll lend up to a higher loan to value. So they'll go to 90 or 95% loan to value. Sometimes they'll go even above 100, which is great. No problem there. And so I think the real opportunity is, can you get a local bank and the CDFI to be in a subordinate position, so behind the first bank. So that local bank lends, say it's $1 million acquisition, they lend $650,000 from the local bank, and the CDFI comes in that second position at $350,000. And okay, that makes sense, even though they're several hundred basis points higher than the local bank. So I'm borrowing from the local bank at, say, today, it's a little different story. But I'm right now probably borrowing it from the local bank at about 4.5%. And my CDFI right now is probably at about 6 or 6.5%, just to kind of put it in perspective.
And remember, you have to take in all of that as you're doing your capital stack to
That's
figure
right.
out how you're going to get it built and how you're going to operate it. So those are really important. For us, really digging into the private and corporate foundations to help alleviate some of the cost up front for construction was really helpful for us. And then again, if you have CDBG, who doesn't know about CDBG dollars and all of those kinds of things that can help. But be a little careful when you're working with your local government and city with the CDBG dollars for commercial work, just to make sure that your development is in line with their goals. Because when those two don't meet, and you don't do what you're supposed to do with those dollars, then you could have to pay those back. So could be at risk to pay those back. Okay, cool.
Next slide. Yeah.
Have you seen TIF dollars, tax increment financing dollars involved in these kinds of projects, and/or other kinds of business improvement districts and downtown improvement districts? Typically where there's a mill levy involved or some reimbursement of tax increment created. There's affordability and tax increment don't always go, work together in the housing part of this. Does it work better in the commercial, or does that?
It does. Yeah. So folks familiar with TIF, tax increment financing, you have your local urban renewal authority typically is the issuer of TIF. Doesn't always, other folks can issue it, but usually it's an urban renewal authority. Mm-hmm. So not every part of your neighbor or your town or your city is in a TIF district. So you've got kind of designated areas that are TIF areas. And so, so in some of the kind of Main Street places that we've looked at, that school that I mentioned was in a TIF district that we were not able to get any kind of support. Why? Because the school's property tax exempt. So it's not generating any property taxes. So that didn't work. I think where you have businesses that are going to have to pay some property taxes, Yes. And so we're also in what's called a business improvement district, in a bid where we pay a little bit more for our property taxes, and that goes to supporting the business improvement district in this corridor that we work in. So, Sina, I would not say it's a leading piece to the work. It is not definitely the largest kind of sort. It's not even, it's a very, very small resource that we've seen in the work we're doing.
And we have not done that yet. We are looking at all the ways by which we would conduct our commercial, work, or where we would go for funding for all of those, and that's on a list, but we haven't used that yet.
Andrea.
Yeah, so I didn't realize the CDBG funds were available. Are they all any loans?
It can be.
It can be.
It doesn't, yeah, I mean, each municipality or, county and how they manage their block grant dollars, it does depend.
Mhm.
I would say, I'm very careful. I only want to use CDBG funds on a front end acquisition side. I really don't want to use CDBG on the vertical development if I don't have to. I mean, that would be my preference not to. Why? People talk about Davis-Bacon wages as an issue. I would tell you it's less that, because right now what we're seeing is contractors are generally paying Davis-Bacon wage. That's not really the issue. It's all the paperwork that goes along with getting the drawdowns on your block grant funding. And so if I can use it all at once, draw it down for that $1 million commercial property, that's so much easier. I've got reporting to do with it, but I don't have to worry about drawdowns. I don't have to worry about Davis-Bacon or any of those factors, because I've used the block grant dollars on the front end acquisition.
Gotcha. Yes. And then my second question was, is there an ideal or just a typical percentage of the capital stack that is grants and not loans? Particularly our state is requiring 25% of the cost of the project to be already in place before we apply for the state funds. And so I'm just curious.
Does debt count as part of that? So if you could say, hey, I'm borrowing 25%, does that work?
Think so, in kind and other types of land donation would count for it too. But I'm curious, just in general, is there an ideal 25% that's grants and then 75 in these mixed use commercial kind of projects?
I will tell you, every deal. This is one of the things I have to say about in the commercial CLT world. Every deal is going to be different.
Every deal.
No offense to the homeownership side of the CLT world, but you've got hey, this is what every homeowner is going to pay their monthly CLT fee, right? Because we figured it out based on what they're buying this home, et cetera. In the commercial world, how much is the land? Am I in the land for really low basis, $5 a foot, or I'm in for $100? Because that's going to drive up what my ground lease fee is going to be to the business or the nonprofit that we're leasing to, right? So right now, I tell you the capital stack, because rates have gone up about 150 to 250 basis points in the last year. You're going to want to probably have conservatively 30 to 50% of that being grants or forgivable loans,
Right.
And the balance being debt.
Right. At this time, that's true.
All right.
All right.
Ways to acquire land. Go
Outright
ahead.
purchase. So if you've got a really good savvy negotiator, and there's something that the community identifies that they want to capture, or you have a business that's looking at capturing, or as part of your strategic planning that you want to capture for development, then you can purchase outright on the market, or sometimes we have folks that we are in relationship with in the communities that are looking at transitioning. And so sometimes we are looked at as a first right of refusal, where we come in and purchase from that way. We have a land bank here, Twin Cities Community Land Bank. So you can, if they have properties in their inventory with Twin Cities Community Land Bank, you can purchase from them or work with them to purchase and hold while you get your financing together. That's the Twin Cities Community Land Bank.
So one of the ways we've worked is we've had donation of property. So we had, in one instance, a nonprofit school educational service that was closing its doors. And so instead of just selling it selling it on the market because they weren't going to continue to operate, or donate it to the local community foundation, they donated it to us. So it was the the single largest contribution we've ever received was, it's called Excelsior School. They closed their doors in 2018. It's a 31-acre campus. It's got 17 buildings on it, a lot of deferred maintenance, a lot of challenges. But that was, again, kind of this donation opportunity was because we were viewed as a trusted partner in the community about how we would take real estate and how we would look at it as far as repurposing it. Since we took that donation on, which again, there's buildings that are from the 1960s, really a massive amount of deferred maintenance. What we were able to do is do a pilot project there where the old part of the campus, which is leased to, you guys have AmeriCorps out here, I assume, right? So we have AmeriCorps Southwest. It's the regional office for the Southwest office. They had been leasing there under these pretty awful conditions about the building conditions. So we were able to leverage that since it was a donation, no debt. We could go and borrow against the property and do $3.5 million of it's net zero electric capital improvements. So we have 500,000 kW of solar, and we have, 80 borings. So we have geothermal, so 80 holes for geothermal. So those 8 buildings are now basically off the grid electrically. We have backup with gas, but basically the idea is that this can operate now without having to use fossil fuels. So that's an example where, again, you get a donation of a property, you can actually leverage that, you can borrow against it because of, we have revenue with AmeriCorps there as a tenant, but it's also a way to just think about how strategically, long-term, you think about this land. The other thing I was just going to point out, and I guess it does tie to a local relationship, is one of the board members of that school that was closing its doors, I think they went to the staff and said, hey, let's look at ULC as an opportunity to work with. So I think, again, and in a nonprofit, this is a fairly unique situation, so I get it. So let me talk about more from a market rate standpoint. We get market rate folks donating property. Not a lot, not like this, not a huge campus, but we get them donating because for tax purposes, they need to do something in a certain year. And so that's another opportunity where, let's just say the land appraises at $1 million, but instead they either donate it to us or they sell it to at a very, very low amount, say $250,000. That difference, that delta from what they sell it to us to what it appraises for, they can take that difference and they can get a charitable contribution. So that's another piece to this work where, again, with land in particular, but buildings too, where owners who have lots of deferred maintenance or have these other challenges with the land because they can't get through zoning or whatever, you as a nonprofit, as a CLT, can come in and offer that as, here's a benefit we provide you, this charitable contribution by you donating it to us or you selling it to us at below market.
It's great. Also, if you work with your public entity, whether it's they've been able to take something through tax forfeit or there was a foreclosure or the city has purchased something that they have maybe they put an RFP out for and like, hey, we can do this, but we'll pay for the land, but then you'll put it back into the development at the price that we purchased it for. And so it's not technically a donation, but it is considered a kind of a net there, net zero in terms of just monies that were put in, or just straight where you have some municipalities who would be willing to give you a piece of land to do the work on. So we have that. All right. Determining affordable rent or purchase price.
Kind of gets to Andrea, your question earlier, right? How do we go about defining what the purchase price or what the rent is going to be? It's driven by the debt, how much debt we take on, how successful are we in raising grants, other things, so that we can make the rent as low as possible. In the case with that school I was telling you about, the 2-generational school, there was the front end support that they got from funders for their kind of improvements. Then there was the back end. 5 years after, they had that lease purchase option, they were able to buy the building at an agreed price that was already set in the lease. So we had a formula set in the lease that said, and it's kind of the higher of this, appraised value or capital, et cetera, that you put into the property plus a certain percentage increase. Anyway, but that's how we ultimately get to either a sales price or a lease price, is really how much is the capital that you're borrowing, how successful are you in bringing other grants to it.
Yeah. So, so if you do use debt, and if you're going to lease, your purchase price again, just it has to cover the debt service at the very least, and time. When I say debt service, I also mean all of those attorney's fees and
Yes.
other things that have been part of your development or pre-development. And if it's a rent or a lease, it also has to work to, again, we're holding things forever, right, long term. So just making sure that you're thinking about, 20 years from now, rising taxes, all of those things. And when you're doing your projections that you're thinking about that. Yep.
I was just kind of this last piece here about being self-sustaining, right? So I think we're all in this business to keep our doors open, certainly, to carry on the mission, to expand on the mission. And so sometimes there's that tough love conversation that you have with that nonprofit partner or that small startup business, which is like, hey, I know you've missed the last 4 months of rent payments. I know you've had issues with either the business model or there was a grant, if this is a nonprofit. And these are all things that have happened in our world. Grants didn't come in when they were supposed to come in. So we're always wanting to work with folks to figure out a solution. But I would tell you, is like, show them the financials. Like, that's what I do. Like, you want to see, here's the debt that we have on the property. Here's what we have to do to cover all of these costs, right? And so that's a part of being very transparent, is being really clear. Like, for us to operate, this is what we have to be able to charge you. And so typical commercial properties, again, this is all driven by what are we into the property on that front end. But things like where Reed with Citywild, when we were able to get that property back in 2007, very different time and very different market than today. So there, the rents are considerably lower than where the market is. We're probably charging $850 to maybe $10 on the high side on a square foot basis for commercial. In that same neighborhood, things are double or even in some cases 2.5 times higher.
And then,
Go ahead.
sorry, I just want to touch on pre and post purchase stewardship. Much like our CLT work in the homeownership standpoint, you got to also consider that you're going to have businesses that may not be able to pay their rent, that might need some touch points. So you just have to make sure you're communicating with your business owners. We're not technical assistance providers per se, but we're kind of the liaison. So we also want to, just be in relationship with them. If they need assistance, then we, in the state of Minnesota, and particularly in the Twin Cities, there are so many wonderful nonprofits that we partnership with, like NDC, Nexus. There's a plethora of folks that we want to make sure that our business owners are getting some assistance from if they need it. So to help with that, and also being aware that we have to fundraise a little bit more to make sure that we can weather the storms that they weather.
I'm curious, have you had nonprofits come to you asking for, hey, I need affordable space, or there's a property that I'm looking for, can you help us figure out a solution? Does that come up for you guys?
Yeah.
Good. And again, I think part of that transparency is sharing kind of the financials with them up front. Something I experienced this year with a nonprofit, pretty much a startup nonprofit that has some backing of some institutional foundations, is we were asking for their financials, right? Here's our financials, here's that, like, this is how we see this operating. It took forever to get just a financial statement from them. And so that was a bit, kind of building trust here, right? We need to know that there's some financial. It ultimately took a relationship with the entity that's really kind of the fiscal agent for them. And so this fiscal agent was very transparent. We were able to sit down with the fiscal agent and go over the financials and get a commitment from them that they were helping support this nonprofit as they were endeavoring in a big project. This was currently a vacant building that we've been asked to purchase. And so that kind of like, and how are we covering our debt? How are we going to make that work? Because this is not a grant. Like this is all financed with debt. So we got a couple funders to make commitments to them to actually, what we call it, and it's not just it's a lease reserve. And so they now have raised about 1.5 years of rent in this reserve, thanks to local and some national folks that have invested in it. So that's an example where, again, I'm going to say tough love, but being really clear with the nonprofit partner, like, hey, I get that you want to do all these things. You don't have a balance sheet. You have no financials. And when I ask to see your financials, you never show me your financials. Like, that's a problem. So I think, you want to be able to work with them. And at the same time, you got to be able to make this financial model work. So in that instance, several local foundations stepped up to back them. So that's another key piece and tool. Yeah. Ben.
I'm most familiar with housing development, maybe folks in the room as well. I got a lot of housing developers here. Can you just zoom back from like a missional standpoint, when you're looking at these, we have different clients then. You're a commercial developer, you're thinking about businesses, nonprofit entities. We're thinking as a housing developer, how do we keep this home affordable? People can have long-term stability in their housing, and then the asset can be a benefit to future homeowners. When you're thinking about that from a commercial land trust perspective, are you viewing like we got to keep the rents low to benefit these businesses in kind of flexing with this community asset of this property can benefit not just that first business, but multiple businesses?
Yes.
Like when you're developing that, like how are you kind of playing with that? How do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say from our end, I think we're looking at, it's not just about that business or that school or whoever. It is also about, like I mentioned, this parking lot that right now is a parking lot. Well, we see that parking lot as an opportunity down the road to actually have affordable housing that's supporting that school, right? So I think we look at it as, hey, upfront intentionality, we want to get this ground lease as low as possible, or we want to have this lease with them as low as possible so that they're not having to pour all their operating expenses and paying us. Then we're in position to buy the facility, which they did. They're in a much better position financially because, quite frankly, the rent they were paying us was more than what their debt is, right? So they were able, with the new market financing, they're in a situation where they probably halved their rent payment, but instead it's a debt payment. So we've helped them financially be in a much stronger position. We also sold them the improvements at $2.5 million below what the market was because it's in a ground lease. Right. So I think there's those kinds of conversations of just like being really clear about how we're committed kind of long-term to that nonprofit or that business, but also being able to say, and this parking lot, because they actually pushed back. They wanted the parking lot always to be a parking lot. It's like, no, because we see this as another opportunity to actually complement what is here with the school. That's an example.
And you kind of alluded to this earlier, but from the financial structure, it's not a fixed, your ground lease is going to vary based upon the deal, and it's a part of how you think about the rent, because you're going to have a ground lease, but you're also potentially having, you got to cover your OpEx for the building and common area maintenance and all of that.
This is a great setup because, boom, project examples. And I'm going to turn to you, because this is you.
Okay, all right, right.
There you go. Nice.
Boom. All right. Okay. All right. So here's a project example, our seminal moment, right, when we decided that we were going to be a community land trust. And in commercial land trust, you're right. Thank you, Justin. It's been a long day already. To set the scene about this is on Selby Avenue, which is part of historic Rondo. And when those 300 businesses were displaced back in the late 50s, a lot of them went over to Selby. But gentrification and of this area definitely was happening, and the community was concerned about being able to have affordable rents. And community seniors were concerned about being able to stay in place, but when they weren't able to take care of their homes and having affordable senior housing. So that is the thought behind that. And we decided to move with the lease model because that's what the community thought would be best, and the business owners who were part of getting these properties together. So it's a mixed-use development. We did this in partnership with Trellis. It's 9,300 square feet of commercial space, 3,400 units. I'm sorry, 3,400 units. That's my dream.
That's your goal.
That's my
That's the goal. That's a
3,400
great
units.
goal.
Okay,
3,400
all right,
units.
I know, right? It is.
Right.
34 units of affordable senior rental housing, and there's 30% AMI, and so that's where we're at with that. They're actually on two separate plots, very close to each other, and these lots were owned by the city of St. Paul, and one had been vacant for over 30 years, and one was vacant for like 20 years. So this was also about revitalizing the area. And we took like about a mile corridor, and we also decided what else would the community want? How else are we going to really make this a destination place? And so we also had the corridor designated as an African American cultural district, so to hopefully bring more vitality to the community. Let's see, there's a lot of capital in this stack here. We use LIHTC. Do we? Oh, okay, thank you. All right. Thanks, Justin. See, you should have been over here. Okay, I know, I appreciate it. Justin is our guru and works for Rondo. When we thought about transitioning and or adding a commercial land trust to the work that we do, it was really, what were the most important principles from the residential CLT work that we thought to bring along, and that was holding long-term hold of property and land, community ownership, and stewardship. Some of the questions we asked ourselves are, what are the goals of the project? Is there a greater mission behind just saying we want to, be a community, commercial land trust? What form will the project take? Is it going to be new construction, rehab? Were we gonna do mixed use? How are we going to do that? How will the project be funded? How many private loans are going to be taken out for this? How will the commercial CLT be operated? Who will make decisions? How will decisions be made? How will rents be? Yes.
All of the commercial space leased prior to financing the development and thus use those leases for the financing, or did you just underwrite it as we've got this space open, we finance it as it is, and then we opportunistically fill that space with small businesses?
Yeah, so we only had one anchor tenant at the time, and that was Golden Time, which is a cafe, coffee shop that's really been kind of the heart of the community. So they have the largest space, and they were our anchor tenant, but no, it was really just about making sure that we had some space that we could figure out being, forever affordable.
Flexible, do you have kind of a standard lease rate and lease term, or are you able to be flexible based on that tenant?
We're flexible based on the tenant, but right now our rents are no more than $7 a square foot.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, and that was through Capital Stack. So again, using the LIHTC to get the actual building built and having that in, and then using some of that to make sure that we kind of incorporated some of the things that we might need in our commercial space. And we also got some grant dollars from DEED from the state of Minnesota to do the build out for our tenants. And then how will tenants build equity? Since equity share is definitely, or shared equity is definitely a part of our world, how does that look in a lease space, in an ownership space? And it's all dependent on the entire deal and how much debt there is or not. All right. And then the goals of the project. So we wanted to provide long-term affordable commercial space for African-American small businesses in a gentrifying area. We wanted to promote an African-American cultural corridor and increase street vitality by developing the vacant lots on Selby Avenue. And we have now actually purchased two more properties on Selby Avenue to help shore up the corridor. Serve as a demonstration project for developing a long-term, self-sustaining, affordable commercial space, and then provide senior members of the community with affordable rental housing. At a glance, I already said all this stuff. We acquired 2 city lots. We use them for mixed new use construction. We decided to go with the lease commercial model. That might change, after in a little while. Again, affordable commercial space at $7 a square foot. We partner with a local affordable housing developer to build and to manage, because at the time, Rondo didn't really have a lot of experience yet in doing that, but now we do. Look at that, yay. And it is owned and operated by Rondo CLT. Our funding sources, we did low-income housing tax credits for the senior housing. We got some Met Council grants for senior housing and commercial for some pre-development. We use CDBG, home, state of Minnesota dollars, and private and foundation grants.
Before you,
sorry.
Yeah, just one thing. Are folks familiar with PRIs, program-related investments? Kind of, shaking head. Okay.
Yeah.
So all your foundations here in Minnesota or wherever you're at, foundations make program-related investments. These are low-interest loans, 0%, 1%, maybe 2% on the high side. They'll do it for 10 years. Sometimes they'll go longer. But PRIs are a really important tool that I've seen with our work, and in that a foundation that may actually, remember I was telling you about that school, that foundation that's making that grant to that school, will do a PRI to us to help us on the acquisition side. So we have an acquisition facility that has a bank. Remember I was telling you before about kind of the leveraging or laying of risk. So we have a bank in first position. They're lending about 60% loan to value. And then all the other resources are primarily PRIs, program-related investments by foundations that are in subordinate position. Some of those PRIs, in fact, this is something I would really strongly encourage. If you're getting a PRI from a foundation, you want it to be unsecured, meaning you don't want it secured against the property. You want it, ultimately, it's against your balance sheet. But the reason you don't want it secured against the property is because it depends. For me, I would just say strategy-wise, we talk about it as non-recourse or recourse. Recourse against the balance sheet may be problematic if you're saying this is going to be a huge long-term hold for us, versus if I'm going to hold the property for a couple of years and I'm using the PRI investment, I would prefer not to secure it against the property because it gives me more flexibility. If I secure it against the property, I'm not securing against my balance sheet. So if I'm taking on longer-term debt, I don't want to secure it against my balance sheet. So when I think about long-term debt, I'm talking about beyond 5 years, going 10, 15, that kind of thing. I'm going to want the property to be the one that's taking on the debt, not my balance sheet.
Exactly.
But does that make sense? So with PRIs, flexibility, I would say don't get it recorded against the property, because typically it's easier when you're going to be maybe working through, say, your commercial tenants, those kinds of things, or you're changing up, or you're going to convert from rental to condo. Having that not be secured against the property gives you more flexibility. Does that make sense? Okay.
Cool.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
Oh, great. Switching over. All right. So this is a neighborhood. Holly Square is an old shopping center in Northeast Park Hill. Anyone? First of all, hands, people who know Denver. Have you been to Denver? No. Okay. Kind of, yeah. All right. So this is, when I say Northeast Park Hill, this is a neighborhood not far from the old airport, which was known as Stapleton. So this neighborhood has been, for the last 60 plus years, has been historically an African-American community. We have seen in the last decade a huge transition in this neighborhood from gentrification, a lot of white folks moving into the community. Definitely the real estate market is being driven up significantly. This shopping center, about 2.6 acres, was built in the 1950s. How did we come into this? Well, back in 2008, there was a gang retaliation. So we have California gangs in Colorado. So we have Bloods and Crips, our two big gangs in the Denver metro area. One of the leaders of the Crips had been murdered in Aurora, which is a community, a city just east of Denver. So in retaliation, Crips came and they firebombed what was the shopping center at the time, the Holly. And that's because this was Blood's turf. So it's kind of this turf thing that really played out. We got involved right after the fire. Actually, the city came to us and asked, would we get involved? And we said, well, we got to talk to the owner. It was privately held. The big issue here was that kind of the anchor tenant was a dollar store. So, and I don't know how folks feel about dollar stores in neighborhoods, maybe good, maybe bad. I had I would say kind of a bit of a mixed feeling for folks, and some liked it, some didn't. Anyway, but the big issue was dollar store, like their corporate offices, I think are in North Carolina, whatever. So we had to spend a lot of time convincing them that they didn't want to rebuild, that it was smart for them just to go away. And that took about 8 months, and we convinced them, and thankfully, this is what we were able to do then. Really with the community. Went through a very lengthy community engagement process, stakeholders like, we're new to the neighborhood, so this is 2008, 2009, we close on it. They don't know me, and I'm not going to be the one that's saying, hey, look, we bought the Holly, we've saved the neighborhood. I mean, that's like bad. That's not how you want to come across. So the first thing was, when we were under contract, I reached out to what's called Strengthening Neighborhoods, a program of the Denver Foundation. And Strengthening Neighborhoods had been working in this community for almost a generation. So with their relationship, we were able to build really a good partnership and build trust, right? That was really fundamental. So building trust outside, even if we're a nonprofit, regardless of the mission, to build trust, we have to show that we're hearing and listening. And so when we bought it, after we closed, we were really clear to the community. We had a big stakeholder meeting. It was like, we don't know what this should be. We're asking for you to help us frame this conversation and really come up with a plan. And so out of that came the Holly Area Redevelopment Project. That was what an acronym that community folks came up with. And when I say community, I mean like residents that live in the neighborhood. Oh, this is a great shot too. So that you can see the mountains, right? Okay, that's downtown Denver. And so we're just east of there, about 4 or 5 miles thereabouts. This is what's now here. This is what's partly, yeah. Okay, so here's the Boys and Girls Club. And behind it was a school, a K-5 elementary school, which actually failed, was unsuccessful, but it was in a land trust with us. So one of the big things, I kind of jumped here, but one of the big things we were able to do in working with the stakeholders is talk about how do we protect, if the Boys and Girls Club is going to be here, if at the time Roots Elementary School is going to be here, how do we protect our work as a community? Like, we've set these values out. We have these Holly principles, the HEART principles, good neighbor principles of how to work together in community. How do we protect all of that? How do we protect all of that? Anyone? Thoughts? How would you protect all this 2.5 years of community engagement, working with residents, stakeholders? How would you go about protecting all that work? Boom. Put it in a ground lease. So we had to explain, like putting it in a ground lease wasn't like, oh, great. Like, what does that mean? So we incorporated the good neighbor principles that came out of the whole Holly work into the ground lease. That's a value that's in the ground lease that Boys and Girls Club signed, as well as Roots Elementary School at the time. As I mentioned, Roots, after about 4 years, was unsuccessful. They were losing enrollment. They were not doing well as a school. So they closed their doors, but because it was in a ground lease, we were able to not only have first right, we were able to buy it back at a discount. And then we went back to the Holly community, hosted several community meetings about who should be here. So we had a couple other schools that were very interested, and then Center for African American Health, which was the successful winner, if you want to say, was selected by the community, was looking for a permanent home. Center for African American Health, nonprofit's been around for 25 years. They were on the other side of Colorado Boulevard, which was the dividing line between Crips and Bloods, just to kind of put some perspective. But they needed a permanent home, and so what we did is we did a lease purchase option with them. So we bought this building back, this one here, leased it to them at a rent that covered our debt, and then that gave them the time to get all of their financing together to buy the building at about a $2 million discount. So instead of selling it on the open market, they could raise, and they didn't need new markets for this. They were able to just raise some capital and get some grant dollars, and they bought it from us about a year and a half after we leased it to them. So lease purchase option. It's a great story, and it's really kind of the full cycle story that when we talk about doing commercial or any kind of CLT, it's like the ability to protect those investments, but to protect the community in a way that they felt like, okay, there's good stewardship here. We understand that ULC isn't just going to go out and sell this on the open market, right? Or that Boys and Girls Club, if they're going to go away 30 years from now because Boys and Girls Club feels like their programming doesn't work in this neighborhood, they can't just sell it on the open market because they're in a ground lease with us. So I think that's all on me, right? Yeah. Okay. This is us both, right? I'm looking at
yeah.
Because Justin put this all together for us. How are we
Yes.
doing? We're doing all right on
we're
time.
doing okay.
Do people have questions?
Yeah. We're throwing a lot out there at you.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Are you limited to what you can put in a ground lease?
Like
I mean,
how,
I would imagine, can you always say, can you put in like first right of refusal on
Absolutely.
this?
Great
and,
question.
If this happens, then
Yep.
this has got to happen, or this is an option.
Yep.
So you can do, and can you do that with residential also? Like,
can
let's
do-
say, for example,
Yeah.
if this goes into foreclosure, we
Right.
get it back, it doesn't go on the open market, we can take.
That first right you mentioned, you absolutely want that in your ground lease.
Mhm.
Absolutely want that first. That's what allowed us to buy the school building, that Root School building back from the lender because we had the first right.
Right.
And in a ground lease, and not to bore you, I didn't bring a copy of the ground lease, but we have it's like a 35-page ground lease. So it's not a one-pager. It's extensive with all the things you can and can't do as the owner of the improvements. And then again, like if for whatever reason something happens bad on the back end, like you got to sell the property, having that first right language is really critical.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Would you have to have some mechanism that makes that first right below market purchase price?
Well, it's defined in the ground lease. I would tell you for this case, we didn't have an amount. We just had the first right language in there. So it just said that ULC has first right if and when Roots decides to sell, or they decide, or they have to close their doors.
And that might look different when we're working with a sole proprietor that might be expecting to get something back out of their investment in the improvement on top of the land. So just again, it's really we're using all the mechanisms by which we do our residential community land work, but you also have to be very specific and understand that it depends on the capital stack of all of those things, what you would really put in that, what's the equity share in that. So we don't do like a 25% or 2% on value. There could be so many other things that could happen.
Yeah.
But in home ownership, the ground lease is built in to the mortgage.
Right.
Is it the same with the commercial, with the rents, particularly if you rent to a for-profit?
So all of our small businesses are for-profit businesses, and that the ground lease is really about what the relationship is with the community, its vision, and what they want to see there. So having all of those things and the ability to continue to stewardship the improvement should something happen. But in a lease situation, again, it was the capital stack that we had, and we have a relationship with actual lease, not just the ground lease, with the business owners. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
So if the business owner wants to sell their business, right? That's fine. Ground lease allows it. It's just that they can't just sell it out on the open market, right? That's what you have in that ground lease that captures that. Does it have a straight formula like the land is 25% and the business is? It doesn't. It is really calculated based on what was the appraisal at the time that we did this deal, what's the appraisal today, and then really kind of like what can you actually get? So we're not necessarily preventing full capture. If capture, and when I say capture, what you're selling it for, if capture is still well below market, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So like that $1 million property that I said, let's say after 5 years, it's only appreciated 2.5%, 3%. Are we really going to prevent, like, we're going to work with that owner so that they can get some capture back so that they get some return.
Right.
And one thing I want to just point out, Boys and Girls Club, multi-billionaire is behind funding that Boys and Girls Club, the Philip Anschutz. So if you ever see, if you're a soccer fan, I think it's IEG. Is that who I'm thinking of, or whatever? Is that it? Who is? Yeah, it is. It's Phil. Anyway, Phil Anschutz, multi-billionaire out of Colorado. He put up all this money. His first reaction when he heard Boys and Girls Club had to do a ground lease with us is like, well, we'll just buy the land. And how cool is it to be able to tell a billionaire, no, you can't buy the land. We're not selling the land. The land is not for sale. That was such a powerful, for me, I didn't tell it to his face because he never came to a meeting, but I told it to the head of Boys and Girls Club because, like, this is what Phil wants. He just wants us to buy the land. The land would have been $1 million. Instead, they paid us $250,000 development rights to build the Boys and Girls Club. So they got a huge discount, $750,000, but they didn't get to buy the land.
Right.
So that's a powerful piece that we all have that we're in protecting, right? To be able to tell a billionaire, nope, you can have development rights and you can build a Boys and Girls Club, and we're not going to be in your day-to-day operations, but you don't get to own the land.
So,
That question is related to your comment. Do you, given where that particular property is located in the Denver community and the fact that, gentrification is occurring, do you get pushback from the community as to, hey, look, I know what you're doing here, but no, we don't want this.
No, the community, I think, was really, I would say Boys and Girls Club had to prove themselves to the community because there were a number of folks who didn't necessarily trust Boys and Girls Club coming into this neighborhood. So that was more about trust with them than us. I think we had built the comfort and confidence with the community that we weren't just going to sell it on the open market. The community is who chose Boys and Girls Club. It wasn't like Boys and Girls Club just came today and said, we want to be here. They had to respond to a request for proposal and went through a very, I think, rigorous process to be selected. I think the community was, I would say, very much focused on using that ground lease as a really powerful tool to protect all the work we've done.
right. And to actually protect the ability, again, against gentrification in the area, even if that's happening, but it actually allows folks to be in place, right? To not be displaced because rents are rising, or much like our, home ownership work, which really should be about revitalizing communities, and those businesses and community are able to share in, the ups and downs of an entire community.
I'm going to go to your next slide.
Go for it.
This is, yeah.
All right. So let's have some real stories of impact for what this did. We were able to retain 7 Black-owned businesses in a gentrifying neighborhood. COVID, the land trust model allowed us to reduce or waive rents for struggling businesses. Our 34 senior residents were able to stay in their community, which is huge. And then technical support for commercial tenants has really led us to guiding a local legacy business through the process of converting to a worker-owned co-op. So that's good. And then another real stories of impact. We had a young woman who purchased a CLT home. She was able to save money. She returned to school. She earned her PhD. Wow. Now she runs a Black-owned therapy practice out of our commercial development. We were able to actually get 3 more businesses, Black-owned businesses, directly across the street from our development when the Golden Time moved into its larger space. And actually the barber shop, that's also another community land trust owner. So it's really helping communities and our commercial, and our leaseholders grow along their own economic continuum. It's important.
And then I talked about it before, but at the Holly, there was this low enrollment with the Roots Elementary School. Because we own the land, we were able to step in, buy the property back at a discount, went through, again, a community process with the Holly folks. Center for African American Health was selected, again, and now they lease to own, as I already explained. And again, now they're in this neighborhood and providing their services. In COVID, I think that was a really critical, they were one of the few places locally where folks could go and get tested. And then when the vaccine was available, they could go there and get their vaccine. Priority was made to folks in the neighborhood. So it was really interesting because there were people from other parts of the city who were trying to get into the Center for African American Health to get their vaccine. So again, it just shows kind of, what's that? And then I just want to kind of this forward thinking about in-placement. I think, let's take that word displacement and think about it differently, about how the work around commercial CLTs is about an in-placement story. Certainly residential is about an in-placement story. Having these two pieces work together, I think, is really core and critical. So I don't know if I know we're kind of coming up to time. So any questions on this, or like just kind of how we think about this? Talk about it. Any other thoughts? Did we answer the questions that were on the board? Look, yeah.
Oh, we forgot we had ours.
Yeah,
up
you've got
there.
a couple of your things here.
We do.
Yeah. So these are both Rondo and ULC, different community, different commercial properties that we own.
Yeah.
If a tenant is doing a lease to buy, so they've got the ground lease and then they've got rent, and then eventually the improvements are going to transfer to them as they buy it.
They don't have the ground lease up front, though. If they're just leasing, like Center for African American Health, they were just, for the first 18 months, they were paying us a rent. They were paying us a monthly lease. They had rights in the lease that gave them the right to purchase the improvements at a fixed amount based on what, basically pay off our debt, and that was how it was arranged.
And then that gets paid to the ground lease.
And then their ground lease is paid to us. That's right.
But you're financing them purchasing those improvements.
They went out and got their own financing to buy the improvements. Yep. Just like that school I was mentioning, New Legacy, that used New Markets. In this case, Center for African American Health went out, got a small loan, and they had other grants. So they had very little debt when they financed the purchase of the improvements. Again, the Center for African American Health building and land was going to be $5.5 million. We sold it to them for about 3.5.
Could there be a model where that tenant, instead of getting their own debt, finances it through the ground lease?
Yeah, I think the ground lease is going to be a lot more money. It's going to be a lot higher because of, again, if we're trying to finance $3.5 million, yes, you could do that. It's going to be significantly higher. Something that I forgot to mention that to think about also is the land stays on your balance sheet, right? So the land at the Holly that I mentioned, I told you, like Boys and Girls Club, that land was about $1 million. So when it's right now, the land at the Holly for both the Boys and Girls Club and the Center for African American Health, that land is valued at about, say, $2.75 million. That sits on your balance sheet. So you have that leverage with no debt, right? Why is that relevant? Because when you have a lender looking to underwrite you to finance another deal, and they see you have a bunch of land that's on your balance sheet with no debt, that's a powerful piece, right? Like you're actually showing, like, okay, I've got $2.75 million, no debt on this land. I've got 2 ground leases. Don't get me wrong, the ground leases are very, very low, as they should be, to really make it work for both the Center for African American Health and Boys and Girls Club. But we have no debt on the land, and that's really a compelling piece to the conversation, to any lender.
The other way that we're actually, again, looking at the work that we do in communities, as well as we are getting ready to have our silver tsunami. That's why I like to call it. There are a lot of legacy businesses that don't have succession planning. So how do we step in to ensure that that they, E&J Cleaners is a legacy business in St. Paul. It's an African American owned business. The kids they do not want to be dry cleaners anymore. They we're done with this. But through relationships, we were able to capture this, and this will be our next mixed use development. Here, I'm calling it the Rondo Community Headquarters.
Oh, is this
it's right here.
Nice.
Yeah, right. Is also another business, another building that had been in the community, used for a lot of different things, but will also be a kind of a destination business center for the community at the same time as needs arise. But really looking at how can you work with your local business owners that are ready to transition, that could either transition to a worker cooperative where you help buy that or whatever, transition out to somebody else, buy it and keep the land and sell the improvements on it. Or again, is it your next mixed use or your next development for homes?
Okay, guys, I know
Okay.
it's
I know we threw a lot
clock
at you.
on the wall, so
Yeah, yeah.
that's time all, but
There's
it's-
wine somewhere.
Yeah. So any other questions or anything? No? Good? Thank you guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right.